You piqued my interest with the conversation about a potential ancient war that is not in the record books, where 95% of men were murdered potentially. So what do you haven't done a video about this yet, but it'll probably be out by the time this episode airs. But tell the audience about that situation. What's going on there?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because when we look at the genetic history of our species, we can see certain bottlenecks that occur. And there's one fascinating one that was about 5,000 to 7,000 years ago. So that's in what they call the late Neolithic period. And what we see there is a massive drop of just male populations. So they look at the Y-chromosome, and that's what's passed down from father to son. And in this period, the populations of Africa, Asia, and Europe all see a 95% drop of male populations, so right down to 5% of men. Everyone else is wiped out. But then if you look at the mitochondrial DNA, which is mother, there's no impact at all. So it's a bottleneck just for men. And then they start looking at the kind of archaeological remains around that period, and they find these horrific sites where there's just basically slaughter, like massive pits of bones, like hundreds and hundreds of bones that have all been, brutalized. And not even just brutalized to kill them, but brutalized after death, like almost cultural slaughter and cultural dismemberment of bodies and stuff all across Europe, all across Asia, all across Asian parts of Africa. And it's really fascinating because what it suggests is that in this period, and the theory is it's because of agriculture, right? So agriculture emerged around then, or at least that's the theory. And then because people were kind of forming down into settled communities, and people now had property effectively, there was something to steal and there was something to protect. So these cultures were almost going around and taking other people's stuff, and the men would fight in their clans and die in their clans and then be exterminated, whereas the woman would be taken by the victors effectively. So you see all these men, like continents of men effectively slaughtered in this time period.
Because of agriculture.
Well, that's the theory. The theory is that obviously if we were living in a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, which is what the theory of what we were doing before agriculture, and obviously we've discussed that maybe that's not the case, but let's just take the mainstream theory for now. There's not so much competition, there's not so much people, and there's not really anything to protect because people are roaming around in small bands, and there's, resources everywhere effectively. But once people settle down, start farming, create settlements, populations grow, you start to have property effectively. You start to have areas of land that are worth things. You start to have livestock, things that can be stolen, things that can be taken, things that are worth protecting. And so the theory is that as that happened, that agriculture wasn't really a peaceful dawn of human progress, or it wasn't just that. It was also the beginning of massive tribal warfare because people had something to take.
So agriculture just makes people batshit crazy.
Yeah, apparently.
That's the theory.
Yeah.
So do you buy that theory?
I don't know. I think the genetic bottleneck is really weird because it just affects men. So what's that about? Why? Because it wouldn't be a natural disaster, because natural disaster doesn't kill, it doesn't discriminate who it kills everyone. But it's just men that we see slaughtered, and we see these archaeological remains of entire villages just, utterly killed and wiped out all across the place.
In brutal ways.
In brutal ways. These horrific wounds and all over the bodies completely dismembered. And also an interesting stat is something like only 50% of trauma wounds actually leave any mark on the bone. And so we see all these wounds and all these graves, but it could be way more people than that were actually slaughtered at this time. And so it's really fascinating that at that period, it seems to be just like constant warfare between people and just all the men just being slaughtered this way and that until only 5% remained. And it's almost like a cataclysmic moment. Like we almost wiped ourselves out through war just because we had something to steal in that period. And luckily we managed to kind of work it out and settle down and figure out that trading with each other was a more productive way to proceed than killing each other. But yeah,
so we are the descendants of the 5% of males that survived this just brutal time period where everybody was just killing all the males throughout the entire society, in Europe, Asia, and Africa.
Yeah, so it doesn't account for the Americas, but everywhere else in the world, yeah, we're all the descendants of the most violent of the men that...
Or the least violent. Or, I mean, if the most violent are probably all dead. The least violent were hiding away somewhere.
Well, I guess so, yeah, maybe. But also we are the descendants of the victors that that did probably do a lot of killing. So
Oh, I see what you're saying. Right,
yeah.
right. Yeah, true. So any other theory as to what could have caused this?
Some people think it was just more of like I don't really understand this argument, but more of a kind of just a cultural. I'm not really sure. I talk about it in my video, but yeah, I don't really understand the other theory, which is more that people just kind of assimilated into different cultures, but that doesn't really explain why all the men were wiped out. So I think it's almost certainly war, especially when you look at the archaeological remains of mass death in this period. So
It's got to be war, but what caused the war? Like, what would cause all of Asia, Europe, and Africa to start like just going to war? Unless one huge area just got up and left and started attacking every other area, right?
I think people just wanted the resources because populations were growing and because resources suddenly became finite. You know, people started fighting over that, and obviously we still do that today, but it's less extreme. But
so let me give you another, maybe just popped into my head, just maybe a possibility, just to worth discussing. What might be so like Genghis Khan, that when there was this dramatic climate change, and he took the entire population of Mongolia and went and attacked China. So was this around the same time period that the northern Sahara would have been changing from green to desert?
as in the prehistoric kind of war and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah.
So what if that area was populated? What if northern Africa was populated? What if it wasn't, what if it wasn't desert? And what if there was a huge human population in northern Africa at that time, and the climate changed and it started to turn to desert, and all of these people had to leave northern Africa, and they all, did kind of like what Genghis Khan did, and kind of, started to attack all these other every other town and village and city that they could go, kill all the men, and potentially take the women, and maybe we're the remnants of that group of people that would just went around and destroyed the rest of Africa and Asia and Europe, but they came from an area that is desert now, so we would have never you don't have like migration, and they just went and started this war because their area was being impacted by climate change.
Yeah, mass climate forced migration, leaving loads of people to find somewhere else to live, and thus killing everyone else that was in their way. And very possibly.
Nobody was ready for it, right?
Yeah.
So between 10,000 and 5,500 years ago, the Sahara was not a desert. It was, right, it was... Could this... Okay.
Yeah, so there you go.
So ask it if that's a current theory or if this is something that we just came up with. Yes, but with nuance. The male genetic bottleneck itself is widely accepted in genetics and population today. The idea that an environmental collapse contributed to its discussion is discussed seriously, but it is not the mainstream default explanation. It is an active research area that is gaining traction. What is firmly accepted is that everybody died, right?
Yeah.
But nobody knows how. So, I mean, if you think about it, this was right before the pre-dynastic period in Egypt. It was right during the pre-dynastic period in Egypt. So you could have had all of the people from the Sahara, going out and wiping out Europe and wiping out Asia because they just weren't prepared and ready for an entire frickin' continent the size of America, North America, like you say, going out there. But then what if those were the people that created the vases? We just looked at a bunch of old vases. What if those were taken from the Sahara, brought into, and maybe a lot of these people settled the Nile and became, pre-dynastic Egyptians, and I don't know. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and just the fact that we do not know why all these men died in this period is really bizarre, and I think that's as good a theory as any, really, that it was because of climate change that forced mass migrations, that forced people to fight for new land, and led to this massive population collapse. But yeah, it's really intriguing, and it is, as you say, a very interesting period in human history. Just before the so-called dawn of civilization, just before the rise of dynastic Egypt, and all across the whole like Europe, Asia, Africa, like such a vast region for this to be happening across. Very strange.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, to have an entire like country or civilization or group of people that all of a sudden doesn't have food because of climate change, that makes people fucking crazy. Like people go absolutely when you get hungry enough, you know, after even just a week or two, you know, try fasting for 5 days and see how you feel. You know, try a month. People go crazy, and so you know that's a lot of times when like you know if people are in poverty, a lot of violence. You know, so could easily see something like that happening, but. Speculation, obviously, because we don't know, but yeah, probably a lot of secrets potentially buried underneath the sand out there.
Definitely.
Yeah.